Hold like this, okay? It might fall.
I'd like to request our dignitaries to take their place on the stage. On behalf of the Moot Court Association of Government Law College and the Chief Justice M.C. Chagla Memorial Trust, we'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone present here to the panel discussion of the 30th M.C. Chagla Memorial National Moot Court Competition 2023. The M.C. Chagla Memorial National Moot Court Competition is one of the most coveted moot courts in the country. Over the past 30 years, this competition has grown in size and scale, being elevated to a national level since its 18th edition. We host students from the best law schools across the country, with the quality of participation refining with each passing edition. We'd now like to call upon our professor in charge, Assistant Professor Nusrat Sheikh, to deliver a welcome address to our guests and audience for the evening.
Honorable Justice Riaz Chagla, respected panelist Mr. Janak Dwarkadas, Mr. Mihir Desai, Mr. Hitesh Jain, Mr. Sarang Jagtiani, Professor Kishu Daswani, respected faculty members and my dear students. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all for this panel discussion and 30th MC Chagla Memorial Government Law College National Moot Court Competition 2023. Today's topic for panel discussion is very crucial as it is very close to our heart and dealing with the fundamental rights and new challenges our virtual world is confronting with. Understanding India's troubling rise in internet shutdowns in recent times. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's view on freedom of speech and expression were rooted in his belief in democracy, equality, and social justice. Today, the biggest challenge the world is facing in digital era where the people can access to internet is crucial for individuals to become informed citizens and to simultaneously exercise their freedom of speech and expression, right to freedom of profession, and so on. Despite this, India has consistently curbed the access to information and individual expression online by restricting internet access in recent time, which is also known as communication lockdown. In 2012 resolution, the United Nations Human Rights Council affirmed that same right that people have offline must also be protected online, in particular the freedom of speech and expression. And subsequently, the United Nations Human Rights Council condemned all measures to disrupt access to information online, deeming gross human rights violation. Now, India has the highest number of internet shutdowns worldwide in the year 2020, amounting to 109, in contrast to Yemen, which is second place, who experienced only 6. That year, India economy also suffered losses of rupees 20,973 crores. The world's blackout and it went on cumulatively for 8,927 hours, affecting 10.3 million people, individuals. So today's topic for panel discussion and the moot court competition problem focuses on one such crucial issue before us, not only as a human being but as a universal citizens. The Government Law College Mumbai has always been in the forefront in having academic discussions and deliberations on such issues of public importance and significance. The title, Frequent Internet Blackout, Protecting National Interest or Suppressing Free Speech, is one of such examples. Myself, Mrs. Nuzhat Afroz Sheikh, Assistant Professor and the in charge of Moot Court Committee, welcome you all present over here for the panel discussion, and this is going to be a real intellectual feast for the participants and audience present over here. I thank the Honorable Principal, Dr. Asmita Vaidya Madam, and the organizing committee for giving me an opportunity to deliver a welcome speech. Thank you all.
Thank you for that lovely note, ma'am. The MC Chagla Memorial National Moot Court Competition is amongst the oldest and most prestigious moot court competitions in the country. To commemorate the 30th edition of this moot, the Moot Court Association is holding the first ever panel discussion under this moot. Our topic of discussion for this evening is frequent internet blackouts, protecting national interest or suppressing free speech. In India, there have been multiple instances of statewide internet bans instituted by state governments under various statutory provisions like Section 5(2) of the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, read with Section 2 of the Temporary Suspension of Telecom Services Rules of 2017 and Section 144 of the Code of Criminal Procedure. Such actions of the state have been appealed against in multiple courts of justice in our country on grounds of being violative of the fundamental citizens of this country. In the technologically savvy world that we live today, where access to the internet is necessary for even the most small tasks and is a requirement for every activity that we do, this evening's subject of discourse is of paramount importance. A deeper understanding of the mechanisms and ramifications of shutdowns is essential not only for law students but for every citizen of this country.
Witnessing such a turnout on a Friday evening in GLC, it is evident our distinguished panel needs no introduction. Our first panelist for the evening is Mr. Janak Dwarkadas. Mr. Dwarkadas is a highly respected senior advocate, appearing extensively before the Bombay High Court, the Supreme Court, the National Company Law Tribunal, and various other tribunals. Being an alumnus of this college, Mr. Dwarkadas has been closely associated with the MCA for several years. Being well known for his contributions towards the cause of the environment, Mr. Dwarkadas has played a key role in the delivery of many landmark judgments furthering environmental causes. We are grateful to Mr. Dwarkadas for gracing this evening with his presence and would like to request our professor in charge, Professor Nuzhat Sheikh, to kindly felicitate Mr. Dwarkadas with a small token of our appreciation.
Our next panelist, Mr. Mihir Desai, is a renowned senior counsel of the Bombay High Court. Mr. Desai, one of the finest human rights advocates at the Bombay High Court, is also the co-founder of Indian People's Tribunal and Human Rights Law Network. Having been a director for the India Center of Human Rights, Mr. Desai has been outspoken in his beliefs about freedom of speech for media and its importance to the democracy. I request our treasurer, Mr. Nikhil Pradhan, to felicitate Mr. Desai.
Today, we also have with us the managing partner of Parinam Law Associates, Mr. Hitesh Jain, a renowned international arbitrator who works in the Bombay High Court, Supreme Court of India, and various other tribunals. Mr. Jain was instrumental in the shaping of the Personal Data Protection Bill 2018 through his valuable recommendations and insights for the same. I request our General Secretary, Ms. Vidula Barze, to felicitate Mr. Jain.
Our next and final panelist for the evening is Mr. Sharan Jagtiani. Mr. Jagtiani, one of the youngest designated senior advocates of the Bombay High Court, also happens to be the former General Secretary of the Moot Court Association. He appears regularly at the Bombay High Court, the National Company Law Tribunal, and other tribunals. Mr. Jagtiani has been appointed as the amicus curiae in several matters involving questions of public and commercial law. We are grateful to Mr. Jagtiani for his patronage towards the activities of the Moot Court Association over the years. I'd like to request our Assistant General Secretary, Ms. Drishti Patrawala, to felicitate Mr. Jagtiani.
I'd now like to introduce our moderator for this evening's panel discussion, Professor Kishu Daswani. Professor Daswani is an internationally recognized academician in the field of law. He has been a professor at Government Law College for over 30 years. He has contributed as a professor at many prestigious colleges and universities across the world. Professor Daswani has been an unwavering pillar of support for this committee, guiding us with the immense experience he has garnered over his years of teaching. His willingness to help out his students is of great value to this college, and we're grateful to Professor Daswani for always being so accommodating and constantly encouraging us to do better. I'd like to request the General Secretary of the Moot Court Association to felicitate Professor Daswani.
I'd now like to open the floor to Professor Daswani to begin with tonight's discussion. Over to you, Mr. Daswani.
Good evening, Honorable Justice Chagla, Mrs. Chagla, my fellow panelists, and all my friends in the audience. You know, as was rightly said, it's Friday evening, and we are discussing internet shutdowns. So it definitely must be an important topic. You know, as all of you in the audience can see us, right? If you look to the left and right, you will see this college was established in 1855. You know, and right on top of the pillar, there's written something, Ne vil fano, means let no evil enter. And this has been the motto of the college for years. And sirs, my panelists, this college has seen the kinds of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and Mr. Lokmanya Tilak, the giants of free speech. So as we launch into today's discussion, may your minds be fair and your speech be free. I've been informed by the Moot Court Association that they're not streaming this live. They're going to create a buffer. Is that right? Yeah. So, you know, we are free to voice our opinions as we like without any fear. Now, you know, amongst the panelists that we have here, you know, some of them are alumni of this college. I would like everybody to give a big round of applause to them. They're taking pride in it. Thank you very much. Now, let me start with a story. You know, Charles Dickens wrote A Tale of Two Cities. So I'm taking inspiration and I will tell you two tales of a city. The city is Impal, the state is Manipur. The date is May 3rd, 2023. there is a protest march by the All Tribal Students Union of Manipur. There are approximately 10,000 people on the streets and there are clashes. But some websites are reporting there are 50,000 people. Actually the number is not important. What is important that this large number of people is creating anxiety and threat among some segment of the population. At the same time, it is creating solidarity and hope with the other section of the population. At that point in time, clashes start. The politicians do not see eye to eye. There are tribals that are being attacked in villages. Houses are being burnt. 300 churches were burnt in Manipur in the first 36 hours. 52 temples were burnt. Does my speech sound inflammatory? Now think if you were in Manipur and you were reading this on your phone and you were seriously concerned that when is my number going to come? And knowing how the internet goes, the discussion changes. The discussion changes to Hindus versus Christians, the Sanatan Dharma versus the Videshis, the indigenous tribals versus the migrants versus the insurgents from another country. And before you know it, you have chaos. You have more and more people becoming inflamed, people wanting to go out on the street, people wanting to do something, not because something's happened, but because this is what they believe has happened. There are stories out there that the mighties are raping the cookies are raping the mighties. There are people with AK-47s around, they're insurgents from another territory. Now tell me, in such a situation, if you were the government in Manipur, what would you do? Would you allow the state to degenerate into anarchy? A border state? Or would you say, you know what? Let me create an internet shutdown. So this is the first tale. Now let me tell you the second tale. And I'm taking Manipur as a backdrop because that is something compelling to all of us as we discuss this topic today. The second tale is of Manipur itself. And Manipur is not new to internet shutdowns. The first internet shutdown in Manipur was in 2015. The next one was in 2016, where the United Naga Council put up an economic blockade, so there was an internet shutdown. In 2018, there were 2 internet shutdowns because the vice chancellor of a university was going to be, or was desired by the students to be removed because it was alleged he was engaging in saffronization of education. In 2019, there was a preventive shutdown. Remember, no protest had happened. It was a preventive shutdown, same what we saw in Kashmir before Article 370. Because the government anticipated there would be protests because of the Citizenship Amendment Act. In 2022, there were protests, and there was another internet shutdown. In 2020, there was a custodial killing, and the students protested, an internet shutdown. In 2021, there were 3 internet shutdowns. And that was because there was clashes between the students and this internet shutdown seems to be a one-size-fits-all for any problem that the government seems to see. Now let's come to 2023, and I gave you the story of May 3rd. And probably this internet shutdown was justified to protect our national security. I don't see any doubt about that at all. Today is October 27th. On October 26th, that is yesterday, an order was passed by the Manipur government asking for extension of the internet shutdown. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in the 140th day of internet shutdown in Manipur. Please tell me how many of you would like to have 1 day of your phones being taken away. In this 140th day of the internet shutdown in Manipur, the reason is, I'll read out, to thwart the designs of activists, it is necessary to maintain law and order in public interest. These activists are anti-nationals and anti-social elements. The question that begins of this panel is there failure of government machinery? Is the government trying to cover up their political inability to solve the problem with the internet shutdown? What has Manipur become? It is the orphan of our country. There is complete national apathy. Forget the communication of the people in Manipur. What about the rest of India knowing about Manipur? What about people from Manipur sitting in different parts of the country? Are they able to get money from their families? Are they able to send money back to their families? What about education? What about buying a railway ticket? When was the last time any of you actually went to the station to buy a railway ticket? So is this lockdown impacting not just freedom of speech, but a whole bundle of other rights? So with this question about whether internet shutdowns or lockdowns are necessary for national security, or are they an excess by the government? What I'm going to do is I'm going to pose one question each to the panelists, and the panelists would be free to answer the question plus give your own opinions on the topic or maybe cross question. And we are very soon going to throw it open to the audience. Okay, so please start jotting down your questions into what you would like to ask the panelists. I'm going to start with the gentleman to my right. Yeah, he's a old friend and I dare say a colleague of mine. You know, Hitesh used to teach at Government Law College many years back. So Hitesh, can I? Oh, Hitesh, right? Yeah. Okay. Now, can you elaborate on what exactly is the Telegraph Act? What are the Telegraph rules? What are the checks and balances? Is there judicial review? From what I understand, that there can be a lockdown on grounds of public emergency and public safety. Could you just give the audience here a broad overview of the government's powers and how they use them, or may I say abuse them, to enforce internet shutdowns?
So Kishu, I want to answer your question in a different format, and I will make an attempt to answer your question also. I think to answer your question, and since the topic has been introduced, we should first keep the legalists aside. This is not just a pure and simple legal question. You cannot just understand in a pure legal format. Let us for a second take a step back and forget everything to do with the proportionality, modern dental college, Anuradha Basim, and understand that the fight against terrorism cannot be equated to a simpliciter law and order problem. I think in this I'm answering your questions also. I'm giving you the reasons on where, how and when you can exercise the powers under the Telegraph Act. Now, as far as, it is all easy to say about internet shutdown and just look from the prism of Manipur. But I think you have to look it from the perspective of India. Now, when you deal with something like national security or a national security agency, now their role is akin to a goalkeeper. And a goalkeeper who is facing the onslaught of strikers. Now, the strikers can afford to fail because they will keep on striking at the goalkeeper. But the goalkeeper cannot fail, because if he fails, then the result is very clear. In the similar manner, you have to understand when you deal with the issue of national security, the terrorists need to succeed only one time, and the national security agencies are concerned who are responsible for national security. They have to succeed every time and again. And if they fail, then you have 26/11, you have Pulwama, and you have Mumbai blast. So therefore you should look from all that perspective. And as I mentioned, sometimes let us start the discussion by keeping the legalists aside, and let's look at the factors that contribute. Another problem why I said that we should not just look from the position of Manipur is that we should also keep into mind that we can choose our friends, but we cannot choose our neighbors. For simple example, when the Professor Sheikh spoke about Yemen and all, now as far as India is concerned, we are in a tough spot. We are surrounded by Pakistan. We have a belligerent China who is also on the back of Manipur, and we know what is China doing for the last 3 years. So basically, when you make the try to compare with the tiny state in a European Union or Europe, Yemen, it may not give a perspective alone. You have to look at it from the India's perspective, because they are not in the same situation to us. So basically, all these factors need to be considered. Keep the legalists aside. I'm sure we'll have more to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Hitesh. I'm guessing that you would want to say that national security is a trump all, which is very, and I do tend to agree with you, because while we do ask for human rights, while asking for human rights, should we go so far down the road that the state itself gets destroyed that is actually giving us the human rights? So I think that's something we really would need to think about. Mr. Blackouts, can I give you a question here? So, there are certain checks and balances in place, and what Hitesh did say, that national security is the most important criteria here when we're looking at India, our neighbors, etc. Now, the internet is no longer a luxury. It's not just for communication and for data, or for entertainment. It is really an existential issue. Now, what about internet shutdowns that are happening not due to national security? There are instances wherein there's been internet shutdown to prevent copying in exams. There are instances where there's been internet shutdown wherein there's a farmers' protest. I do not think a farmers' protest is really a national security issue. There are internet shutdowns when there was a CA protest. So, especially to prevent copying in exams, and how does that kind of justify the government from blocking internet?
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me and Professor Sheikh for introducing us, and I'm happy to be here. And to answer your question, let me start with a small example of a video that was sent to me on internet, mind you. This is about a professor who enters a classroom. It's full of students from different parts of the world. It's a mature class of students, not young kids. He walks in with a big frown. He looks very angry. He straight away walks down to the second last row in the room, sees a girl who's oriental looking, stares at her, shouts at her and says, "You will get out of my class right away." And she didn't know what had happened. She's totally dumbstruck. She's wondering what is going on. Everybody is looking at her. He says, "Now, I want you to get out now. Just pick up your stuff and get out. Get out of my sight." She was virtually trembling. She didn't have the guts to say anything. She walked out of the class. The professor goes back to the blackboard. He looks at the class. It's a class of law students. And he says, and I pose the same question to you gentlemen and ladies here, how many of you thought what I did was right? Would any one of you from the audience, from the room, raise their hand if they think what I did was right? Not a single student raised their hand. How many of you do you think felt what I did was wrong? Almost everyone raised their hand. And he said, "Why did you all protest? All of you thought what I did was wrong. None of you agreed what I did was right. This girl has been thrown out of class. Can one of you tell me why?" So one student got up and said, I don't know why, but that's not the way to treat any student. Exactly. Why did you not dissent? Why did you not question? Why did you not disagree? Why did you sit quiet? That's the lesson I'm going to talk to you about today. The freedom of speech and expression. And the right, which includes the right to question, the right to dissent, the right to debate. And that's the right the Constitution has given us by 1918. So if we are going to barter that right away, on any pretext, which is now, at least since Anuradha Bhasin's case and the subsequent case of the journalists, where the safeguards have been laid down, it is a goal-oriented approach. It can be subjective, but it has to be based on objective criteria. It can only be for the reasons which 19.2 permits a law to be framed, the reasonable restrictions which are permitted by 19.2. The area and the sphere of lockdown is now limited. It is goal-based. It has to ultimately answer the test of reason and reasonableness. Over and above that, the decision itself is amenable to review by a review committee, where the material on the basis of which the ban is imposed is examined or can be examined. And the review committee's decision is itself subject to judicial review. Now, once you have this in place, which happened only as late as 2020, and it was attempted to be expanded upon in the later decision of the media professionals, where the journalists said that, look, you have allowed 2G to come into JNK. Why are you restricting 3G and 4G given the fact that COVID pandemic has hit and we need internet access and we need access to information? The Supreme Court did not examine it itself, but it broadened the composition of the review committee, and they included officers from the central government besides the state government, and they said, we will apply the rule of proportionality, we will apply the goal-based approach, we will examine if anybody, and it will be all subject to judicial review. Now, I only put it to you that if there is a mechanism which is the safeguard on the excess and abuse of power, why should internet communication, because that communication, internet is only a means, it's a means of communication. Previously we did it under 144, but the Supreme Court said that that's hardly the way. So you brought in the Telegraph Act, the telegraph rules, etc., and the right to suspend. But even then you put the checks and safeguards. So to answer your question, Professor Daswani, I would submit that it is only when a government is weak, it is only when it is not in a position to enforce law and order, which is the prerogative and the obligation of a democratically elected government, that you resort to these means. And let me give you one example before I end. Israel was priding itself on having the world's best surveillance system. We know what happened in the month of October to that world's best surveillance system. They went back to traditional means of communication, and they were able, I'm not taking pride in what they did, I'm only pointing out that the Hamas was able to defeat the world's best surveillance system by going back to basics. In other words, you cannot suppress and you cannot bring about lack of communication or the right to dissent or the right to debate or the right to question by these, as I would call, band-aid acts of shutting down the internet. I think the sooner we start thinking otherwise, we in the sense, we because we are ourselves the government, and therefore the government, the elected government starts realizing that that's not the way to go about things. It will be easier. More so because the internet is not only a means of communication, but is also a part of commercial speech. And as a statistic, I may only tell you that India has lost 2.8 billion in the year 2022 alone on account of these internet shutdowns. So the ramifications are far greater than as what Professor Daswani was asking about banning the net for exams and stuff like that. I think there are far greater and serious violations of fundamental rights that take place. Thank you.
That's very, very well made out points on the fact that, especially when you said if the government is weak, is going to use this band-aid mechanism. I mean, definitely shutting down internet is putting a band-aid on a bullet wound, because you cannot really cure the wound. There has to be political will. And if you do look at Kashmir with almost 550 days of internet shutdown, and sir, with due respect, 2G is a joke. You know, putting 2G and saying, you know, we've restored services, I don't think that is really bringing down communication. It's merely cosmetic. And also, maybe I'll come back to you a bit later, that, you know, with the question that, do you think the courts have done enough? Because right now, as we see, the review committees are non-functional. They're not publishing their reports. The state review committees are not looking at it again. In fact, the internet shutdown order that came yesterday from Manipur is identical to the last 20 orders. There is absolutely no difference. It's the same order that is repeated with the same bit of flux. And maybe I'll come back to you with a question. Yeah, maybe I'll ask Mr. Desai. So Desai, a question for you here is, there is conflict in places. Kashmir is conflict. In fact, majority of the internet lockdowns in India have been in Kashmir, Manipur, Punjab, which are conflict areas. And that is what, like Mr. Hitesh was saying, there seems to be some semblance of justification. Is there a justification for having an internet shutdown for 500 days? Is there a justification for having it for 140 days now in Manipur? Or do you think the government is kind of happy? Because no information is coming out of the conflict area. I am not accountable. If there are any human rights violations, it is in that area, it is not coming out. In fact, it was only when the viral video came out of Manipur did the leaders in the government actually start taking cognizance of it, or started speaking about it. For that matter, it was a compact conflict which the government didn't have to deal with, either emotionally, strategically, or politically. So do you think this is a design of the government to keep it this way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it, as far as I am concerned. Let me at the outset say I'm feeling very privileged to be here with the esteemed panels. I may have disagreements with some of them, but that's part of democracy. And that's why we are here today, openly discussing and debating. So, thank you all for inviting me, and thanks for the excellent panel you have got today. Let me just say one thing, that I personally feel that majority of do I say that can never ever be an internet shutdown? My answer is no. You can have it. I'm not for a moment saying that you can't ever have an internet shutdown, etc. That's not the pitch I'm making. But in the case with which we are dealing with, whether it's a conflict-ridden areas of India, I personally feel it's an extension of what is presently happening in India. Let me be very blunt about it. I personally feel that the establishment, and that's not just true of this establishment, any establishment, doesn't like any narrative which is alternative to their narrative. Okay? They have a narrative. Okay? Any narrative alternative to their narrative is something which they frown upon, and they want to stop it. Okay? They want to stop any kind of alternate I mean, why would, I mean, internet shutdown is one thing, but why would a fact-finding team, or why would a professor from Hyderabad who gives an alternate opinion be subjected to FIRs and likely to be arrested, etc., etc. And there are the whole idea of internet being available, it's not just a question of internet being, because if internet is not available right now, if at any given point of time, it is not possible to disperse news in the present day and age, because everybody works on internet. Right? The journalists work on internet, I mean, they're ground level journalists. I mean, I was seeing, I mean, just Janak Bhai mentioned about Israel and Gaza. I was just seeing some YouTubes from Gaza yesterday, and the situation is so bad. And they said that, look, I mean, our viewpoint, what is happening to us is not coming out at all in the media. Okay? Because the media is completely biased against us. Now, they may be right, they may be wrong, but the point is the alternate narrative is not coming out at all. Okay? And it's important in a democracy that it's not just because my personal feeling is that if you want to somehow or the other stifle dissent, okay, and it has been happening in various ways. If you want to stifle dissent, one of the best way of doing it is by controlling the internet. Now, in today's, it was different. For instance, during emergency, different measures were taken. Now there are different measures taken, etc., etc. But if you want to stifle dissent, okay, internet control is very, very important. Okay? And sending messages that any alternative narrative, and you will be treated as anti-nationals, you will be treated as urban Naxals, you will be treated as jihadis, whatever you want. I think that is a big problem which we are facing. But the other thing which I just wanted to touch upon, that's just one aspect. The other thing I just wanted to touch upon is internationally as also nationally, we have not recognized access to internet as a fundamental right. What we have said instead is internationally also that internet access is an enabler to fundamental rights and human rights. And with the growing use of internet, okay, it's not only the question of freedom of speech and expression. Okay. That is one aspect, of course, freedom of speech and expression, communication of idea. But it's also a question of right to education, right to work, right to commercial transactions. I mean, if you are in Kashmir, you want to bid for a tender, how are you going to do it? You just can't do it because there is a shutdown. Or if you are in Manipur, how do you do it? You can't do it. So these are all right to health. A lot of these, a bundle of rights get affected nowadays because it's not only a question of freedom of speech and expression. The use of internet has become so widespread. I mean, every village has access to internet now in some form or the other. Speed may be less, speed may be more. Number of devices may be more, number of devices may be less, but that's what is there. And therefore, internet shutdown, which is basically shutting down yourself to the entire world. You don't know what is happening outside the world. And please understand that, yes, do fake news come on internet? Yes, they do. But when internet is shut down in an internet age, there are more rumors spreading because nobody knows exactly what is right and what is wrong. So rumors spread otherwise also. I mean, you don't need internet to spread rumors. Rumors spread. So I personally feel that internet shutdown, yes, in a given case, for a limited time, temporarily, for security of state, because now Supreme Court has itself said in two judgments, in Madhyam as well as in one other judgment, that security of state which is thrown at us every time we try to ask any question is not a free pass for the executive. You have to show that actually security of state is involved. Just because you say earlier, the reaction used to be once you talk about security of state, the courts say hands off. Now the courts are saying no, just because you say security of state, that's not enough. You have to show that security of state is involved to us. You have to show how that security of state will be protected by affecting a particular fundamental right. Unless you show both these things, we are not going to just allow you to have a free pass. And I think that is also something which is being developed by the courts, which is very important. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Desai, very much. That was so. I mean, from while you were talking, I was thinking that there is a problem in a given part of the country, and I do an internet shutdown. Wouldn't the government be better off keeping the internet on and engaging in political dialogue? So that if there is any fake news or if there's some kind of information, I want to give some comfort to the people in the area that is under conflict. So in fact, keeping the internet not in a shutdown zone, in fact, benefits the government to a greater degree, provided the government has got the political will to reach out and address the people. Right, Sharon. Now, from the discussion right now, there have been two elements that have come in. One is that the internet shutdown deprives the people of certain basic necessities, commercial communication. I mean, just filing a GST return. How do you do that? How do you do a net banking transaction? A variety of things. And the other is that the absence of internet prevents dissent. Now, you're the youngest on this panel. Yeah, although you're a senior, but you're the youngest on this panel. So, of course, as a global citizen, so many of us have derived from having the ability to communicate with the world and getting information. Now, there was a case in Darjeeling. The internet was shut down for 100 days. The students actually walked several miles up a hill to the border of Sikkim, where they got some geo connection and they were to fill up their exam forms. Now, in modern day India, which is a digital India, where we are being promised on G20 issues on how the India is progressing. We've had, if I'm not mistaken, 89.5 million digital payments last year. And if I take the next four countries in the world, we are more than that. Unfortunately, we have the largest number of internet shutdowns in the world. And if we take the next 10 countries, we are more than that. So, in this dichotomy, how do you see the new India going? I mean, do you think there has to be an attempt by the courts or by the legislature to move the right to internet into the constitution as a fundamental right? I believe Kerala is already looking at that. So could you give us your views on the right to internet as a fundamental right?
Thank you, Kishu. And start by saying very briefly what a pleasure it is to be here and to share this panel with my esteemed guests and of course Justice Chagla and Nilufar Chagla as well. The easiest way for me to answer this question is to let you all know that I'm sitting next to my senior, something that was not said in the introduction, and like I've done many times in court, I just tug at his gown and say, come on, you say this, and he'll answer the question on my behalf. But that's not an option available for me, and I'd certainly not be making him any the more proud if I did that. So let me come back now. Light remarks aside, let me come back to a very serious question. How do I look at this problem in New India as a global citizen, and specifically the question of whether the internet can be recognized as a fundamental right? To my mind, it does not involve any intervention by legislation, because if it is going to be recognized as a fundamental right, like our constitutional courts have done over the last 70 years, is that over a period of time, they have read into Article 21 many facets of fundamental rights as part and parcel of the umbrella of Article 21. So if the internet is ever going to formally acquire that status, today the status of the internet as I understand it is that it enables free speech, and therefore it's an adjunct or a concomitant to 19(1)(a). The position, if I can give you an example or an analogy, would be what newspapers were. I mean, ultimately, the right of free speech was then extended to the right to disseminate speech. Not only to be the speaker, but then also to be the consumer of speech. That was an extension of the literal language of 19(1)(a). Similarly, if you're going to take it a step further, the internet today is an enabler of free speech. And this has been recognized not only, of course, in panels like us, It's been recognized in the United Nations. There have been special rapporteurs and special reports of the United Nations recognizing the internet as an enabler of free speech. That's the status it has today. Is it going to be elevated to a fundamental right under Article 21, just like, for example, education was some time ago, just as the environment has been since the 1980s? I do think it's a matter of time, and I think it is going to happen, but it's going to happen by the courts over a period of time. And one must also keep in mind that there's no point elevating it to a fundamental right when the state doesn't necessarily have the wherewithal to make it available to everyone today. So doing it is important, but doing it in a way where it's realistic to implement is also important. Something that we learned during the lockdown when our courts moved on to a virtual system. Sitting here in Bombay, we almost deluded ourselves into believing that everyone across the state of Maharashtra has equal access to the internet. But we learned that everyone doesn't have equal access to the internet. It was a reality. So if a court is going to do so, divorce reality, it becomes an illusory right. So to answer your question, Kishu, should it be? Yes, it's an aspiration. It should be elevated to an Article 21 right. Is it something that can be done hastily and done today? Perhaps one would have to look at the reality. But whether it's in Article 21 or not doesn't detract from its importance to the 19(1)(a) right. And that's the distinction I want to make. Whether it reaches the status of Article 21, it's still very much integral to the 19(1)(a) right. And that takes me to another question that I don't want to get lost in the constitutionalism of it all. Because many years ago, Maneka Gandhi told us that you have to look at 21, 19 and 14 as a triangulation of rights together. So let's not lose too much time in whether it should be here, whether it should be here. It's extremely important where it is right now. So that's the answer to your question, but let me also weigh in with a few comments to what I've heard right now on the problem of internet shutdowns. We have now the benefit of Supreme Court decisions in Anuradha Bhasin more directly, before that in Shreya Singhal, which were helpful decisions in as much as they gave us some clarity on procedural aspects of internet shutdown. For example, in Anuradha Bhasin, we were told that the principles of proportionality must apply to that. What does that mean? It means that even if there's a problem in a part of a state, you can't shut it down for the entire territory. You can't shut it down indefinitely. Did that have a salutary effect? Yes, it did, because the suspension rules were amended and now it said that you can only suspend it for 15 days. Does it change matters on the ground? Probably not, because all you do is that you reissue the same order every 15 days. And that takes me to the point that I really want to make. That courts can say what they want to say, we can legislate in the way that we want to legislate. But ultimately, it is the subjective perception of those who are enforcing laws. And when those laws are challenged to a degree, it's a subjective perception of a judge as well, which is going to be the final determining factor on whether all of these lofty principles are going to make a difference on the ground. Look at the statistics that we have in front of us today. Yes, national security is a concern, we all know that. But whilst numbers will never tell you the full story, numbers do tell you a story. From 2016, apparently, India has been responsible for 58% of internet shutdowns all over the world from 2016. Barring 2023, where we are second to Iran, in the last 7 years we have been, by some distance, the largest shutting down state of the internet in different regions. I mean, for example, last year we were 2.5 times Ukraine, which is involved in a full-fledged conventional war. What does that tell you? Whilst, of course, one cannot overemphasize numbers, they do tell its own story. And the story is this, that when you take the decision to shut down the internet, national security is a phrase we use, but what it means may vary from person to person and perception to perception. And therein lies the problem. And the problem is this, that we live in a world where people have a view on a topic based on where they stand on politics. That's the reality of the world that we live in, and we're all guilty of that. We are all on this side of the spectrum or that side of the spectrum. And unfortunately, it is where we stand on a political issue, we reverse engineer from that position and then decide whether national security is violated or not violated. As opposed to asking ourselves the objective question,
As my senior Mr. Dwarkadas said, yes, there's an element of subjectivity, but based on objective factors. Based on objective factors, no matter where you stand on the political divide, is there a national security problem? Is there a public order problem? Today, my concern as a citizen is that there are not enough people in this country, no matter what they do, that can dispassionately approach this problem. And I just want to conclude by saying two things. This is a problem not just recognized or identified today. I want to read a sentence from a decision of the Honorable Supreme Court in 1952 in a case of V.G. Rao versus State of Madras. The question was, what was a reasonable restriction under 1905? The Constitution uses words. What words mean is how you understand them. And this is what the Supreme Court says. In evaluating such elusive factors and forming their own conception of what is reasonable, in all the circumstances of a given case, it is inevitable that the social philosophy and scale of values of the judges participating in the decision should play an important part. So even a judicially trained mind doesn't have a formula to solve this problem. His own social philosophy, which is ingrained as part of his DNA or his nurturing, is going to weigh in on how you see this. Is it national security? Is it public order? And it's not a problem in India. It's a problem in the UK as well. What happened in the UK in a decision that Justice Nariman referred to, this is in the case of Chambers versus Director of Public Prosecution. There was a message sent on tweet. And this is the language of the message. And I'm reading it, and of course it has certain profanity, but I'm going to read it because this is a mature discussion. The message said, crap, Robin Hood Airport is closed. You have got a week and a bit to get your shit together, otherwise I'm blowing the airport sky high. The question was whether these words constituted menacing words so as to warrant criminal prosecution. And Justice Nariman said that two sets of judicially trained minds, one, the Crown Court, said yes, menacing words. The Queen's Bench said, look at it in context, not menacing, no case for prosecution. And he identified the problem by saying that forget about the differences amongst lay people or executives or administrators of the law. If two judicially trained minds can't agree, then of course that's the problem in this matter. That internet shutdowns is not on national security based on objective factors. It's really where you stand on the spectrum. And to my mind, that's a human problem which no legislation or court decision can solve.
Thank you, Sharon. That was very well put. I thought the statement that you made, that our perception of national security is starting at our political end or our political mindset. I'm going to just put a question out here and any of the panelists can take it. It is quite clear that national security is a big bogey out here. And as Sharon said, two judicial minds cannot come to the conclusion of national security. I may say that judicial minds do not have to come to a decision of national security. The question whether it's a national security issue really lies with the executive and probably the army on the ground. And since Israel and Hamas have been discussed here, let me put an analogy here. Israel doesn't like Hamas. And there are probably 200,000 Hamas operatives on the Gaza Strip. Does that mean I am going to bombard the remaining 2.4 million Palestinians? Now the question here is, if there is a national security issue between a select population, does the rest of the population have to suffer from an internet shutdown, or are there other legitimate means at our disposal?
As Janak Bhai and Sharan mentioned about Anuradha Bhasin and the principles and all. Now let's come to the judgment of the Supreme Court in Anuradha Bhasin, when they tried to deal with the specific situation of Kashmir and the shutdown that happened at that time. Now, very clearly, Supreme Court laid down the principle that yes, there can be an internet shutdown, but it will be basis two factors. One, they reiterated the doctrine of proportionality, and second, the principles of necessity. Second, and since you guys are all the law students, and I will urge you to read this judgment carefully, and particularly paragraph 35 of this judgment. So Supreme Court lays out various factors, and one of the factors which the Supreme Court laid out was that the measures for the internet shutdown must have a legitimate aim. Now, what is the legitimate aim? The legitimate aim is to save human lives. Now, when the Supreme Court was referring to data and why national security is not a bogey, because you must read that judgment, and in that judgment they have laid out the factors. So, what they have said, between 1990 and 2019, Jammu and Kashmir had 71,038 cases of recorded terrorist violence. 14,000 civilians were killed. 5,292 soldiers were martyred. And more than 22,000 terrorists were eliminated. Now, this is not something which has been plucked in the air. These are the recorded data, and this has been recorded in the judgment. So basically, the geopolitical struggle cannot just be played down or ignored. Now let's come to the second factor, which was laid down in that judgment. I will come to the specifics. That there should be a suitable mean for furthering the goal when it comes to the internet shutdown. And what is that? To save lives, sometimes we must, in certain situation, put a shut on the internet also. See, all these things is good. In rhetorics we can speak, but we have to also understand what is the face of modern technology. The communication which is being used by the terrorists is something called dark net. To transfer the funds, they use crypto. And yeah, I'm sure many of you would have heard about Tor, or there are so many other websites we are not even aware. So do you think a terrorist is going to go and hand deliver the weapon, or going to send an envelope in which he will write his plan of action and ask his fellow coordinates to conduct? The handlers are from different countries. The medium is internet. So in that specific situation, if you have to act, you have to shut down the internet. Yes, the question can be to what extent we should always look into that. There can be the less intrusive measures. But at the end of the day, all these things, nobody denies the importance of the internet. But at the end of the day, jaan hai to jahan hai. If we are alive, the internet will be there. If we are not alive, what is the question of this internet? So don't trivialize the national security. Yes, we should look at necessity, proportionality. But when we explain to everyone, we have to look at all the facts. We have to look at all the data. We should not just look at from the isolation and look at from the rhetoric. Gaza, Hamas, everything is there, but India, according to me, has a specific issues, and we should look from the Indian factors also, which is very important.
Thank you, Hitesh. But just a slight pointer here I'd like to put out to you. The 550-day lockdown in Kashmir, or internet shutdown, was because of Article 370. It was not because of from 1990 till today. And that clearly shows there was a preventive shutdown by the government and not on issues of national security. I'm of course it was upheld by the court. Yeah. No. I'm just pointing out this little fact. Although I wish you would also address the point of shutting down internet due to copying an exam. So maybe you can come to that later. Yeah, gentlemen.
I think Professor Daswani almost took the words away from my mouth, that Kashmir was a situation which was brought about by a political action of abrogating Article 370 and the likely what would happen as a consequence of abrogation. So I don't think that's very apposite, but I'm not going to disagree with my friend Hitesh on the fundamental premise that there can be and there will be and there are going to be situations where national security or national interest does warrant a shutdown of the internet. The question is twofold. One, what is the territory to which you will extend that shutdown? There also has to be proportionality in the geographical territory to which you will impose the shutdown. and the second is the time duration. So we cannot lose sight of these factors, because if you are talking about the rule of proportionality, I mean, are we saying that the state, whether it's at the center or it's at the state level, is not able to control law and order? Are we saying we are not able to control infiltration? Are we saying we are not able to protect our borders? Is there a tacit admission on our part that but for the shutting down of the internet, which has very, very wide ramifications on commercial speech, on business being carried on, as Professor Daswani talked about, tenders, Mihir mentioned businesses being carried on, education, healthcare, imparting of knowledge. So it's not a question of one single dimensional approach. I think the national security. I hope I have not opened up the enemy in some form. In fact, it helps me to make my next point. And the next point was this, that more abuse can take place in the name of national security than actually what national security was. Because more wars are being fought in the name of religion than what religion will ever want. Thank you.
So enough this. Yes, it is taken. No, and I don't think we should get too alarmed about the large number of internet shutdowns in India. Hitesh, I don't think so, because China and Russia are not on that list. They are not disclosing the number of internet shutdowns they have. I'm sure they would be way ahead. We should not compare to that. Okay, I'm gonna maybe Sharan and Mr. Desai can make a couple of comments, and I'm going to throw it open to the audience for questions. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Sharan, would you like to, Mr. Desai?
I was just thinking about saying exactly what Janakbhai mentioned towards the end. Namely, nobody would question the fact that if national security requires certain measures to be taken, they need to be taken. I mean, one would not question that. Question which arises is whether certain measures are taken under the guise of national security, or is the national security really in danger? And the reason why I'm saying this is that in Anuradha Bhasin's case, the Union government's case was that, look, terrorism is continuing even today. Situation is very bad, we can't start internet, it's impossible. And in the 370 case, when it was argued, because it suited, the Union government argued that things have become very normal after abrogating 370. Now Kashmir has come to normalcy. So it becomes you see, the question is that you take a position depending on what suits you. That's what is questioned. Not where the question again, I want to repeat the question again, is not whether certain times internet shutdowns are necessary or not, but whether the particular internet shutdown is actually required or not becomes a question, especially looking at the consequences which it can have on people's lives, especially when you are applying it to an entire geographical area, and especially if, as I feel very strongly, that if it is done in order to stop any alternate narrative from coming out from that area. So these are the kind of situations which I feel that yes, you have your internet shutdown, sometimes it becomes absolutely essential, you have it. But it is our duty as citizens to question it when we feel that it is being done excessively, it is being done at the wrong time, at wrong place, or it is being done maybe at the right place or right time, but to a geographically a very large area. I think those are the questions which we have to ask, because otherwise what happens is that we don't want to become a police state. on the basis that on the basis of this, what the Supreme Court calls the argument in terror element. Okay? That we are being, an argument by which you try to terrorize the court into giving certain orders, because you know that kind of thing. We don't want to become that, and therefore scrutiny, accountability, transparency. These three things are very important. Okay, in any government action. That's why you have the Constitution. The Constitution is for the purpose of accountability and transparency of the government, apart from giving rights to people. It's a minimal government, and whatever government is there has to be accountable and transparent. That's what I think we need to focus on. Thanks.
Thank you, Kishore. Just 2 or 3 additional thoughts and feeding off what I've just heard. So far, this conversation just now has been more in terms of whether internet shutdowns are justified in the name of national security. But what we have to also keep in mind is that if internet is an enabler of a 19(1)A right, the restrictions are to be found as reasonable restrictions in 19(2). And 19(2) is by no means restricted only to national security. There are a range of other reasonable restrictions, and the one which is more commonly invoked, and which is in fact a wider restriction than national security, is public order. And I have in front of me the 3rd May 2023 shutdown for Manipur, which is a shutdown in the name of public order. And now just to kind of visualize this, what the Supreme Court has said in explaining what the content of each of these phrases is. They say that the widest phrase or the largest concentric circle is law and order. Within that, you have a concentric circle called public order. And within that, you have a concentric circle called national security. So national security is the most extreme, in the sense that if it's a national security problem, it's necessarily a law and order problem. But if it's a law and order problem, it's not necessarily a national security problem. So the concern, of course, is, and I don't think anyone on this panel disagrees with Hitesh, that national security has to be an exception when it is validly invoked. Nobody is taking an extreme view. The US Constitution in its plain language says that Parliament shall make no law to abridge speech. But the US Supreme Court has said it's not absolute. Of course, you can have in limited circumstances. So nobody is suggesting an absolutist view that you can never. But the concern here is that it's not just national security, it is even public order, which is the exception. The litmus test for me is going to be, whilst I think that the judgments of the Supreme Court have been helpful in bringing in transparency, Justice Gawai has said that you now have to publish the shutdown orders. In fact, in the Anuradha Wasim case, the Supreme Court noted with dismay that when it asked the state of Jammu and Kashmir to produce the public orders, they only produced sample orders. They didn't even produce the actual public orders in their entirety. So the Supreme Court said that now part of transparency is that you have to publish the shutdown order, and that's a procedural safeguard. My last thought is going to be, so really what I would like to see is, so far we've had discussions in courts on the larger issue. What I would like to see is that if ever there is a challenge to a shutdown order which uses phrases, which uses expressions, which are wide in nature, the litmus test is going to be how a court is going to react and respond to that challenge to a public order. Thus far, the courts have laid down principles, but said that the actual implementation of those principles we leave to the executive. And in the later judgment, the Foundation of Media Persons said that we will constitute a committee of secretaries of different departments. But I'm sure one day this is actually going to be challenged in court, and that's when we will have a clearer idea of where we stand on this issue.
Just one small response to what Sharon said. I totally agree with what you are saying, no dispute. Similar situation has arisen with 144 orders. Okay. That there is a 144, I mean in Bombay for instance, there is a permanent state of 144. Okay. It's a permanent, I mean there is a constant, and I'm not talking about this government or that government, whichever is the government, it's permanent state of 144. Okay. So if 5 people can't assemble, etc., etc. When you challenge the order, okay, what happens is, and I guess Justice Chagla will agree with me, that when you challenge an order, by the time the matter comes up, those 15 days or 30 days are over. So the matter becomes infructuous.
Just one, I think that the universe is listening to this conversation because as we've been speaking, I got a notification from Bar and Bench which says Gujarat High Court asked Jamnagar collector to explain why 144 CRPC orders were extended. So really, as part of the freedom of speech and movement through the internet, it's literally happening all over the country as we speak.
I think, Sharan, you also make one interesting point, and from the discussion, what we have gathered is while an executive may pass an order of internet shutdown, but we have a very robust judiciary who is alive to the circumstances, a judiciary who is willing to act. As you rightly say, depending upon the situation in the future, it will be tested also. But I think the judiciary gives the hope to the citizen. And when the judiciary gives the hope to the citizen, I think the citizen should be, should be assured that your rights cannot be easily taken away by any executive. I mean, at the end of the day, there can be any orders, but it will be subject to the judicial review and challenge.
Hitesh, I would like to add something to that, interesting as you sounded. I'm reminded of what Justice MC Chagla once said. He was asked as to whether he was not afraid that orders which he passed would be upset by the appellate court. And he said, I take great pride in the fact that whatever orders I pass are upheld up to the last court. I think the executive should think like Justice MC Chagla. Instead of waiting for courts to correct them, they should pass orders which are in the national interest and not in the name of national interest. Thank you.
I'm going to throw the questions open to the audience, and just one little comment, on what Sharan said and what Hitesh said. In Aryaban Sharma versus State of Manipur, and even in the Bhasin case, the judiciary has not been really looking at the merits of the order. They've been trying to find a way around it and say, is there a way we can restore 2G? Is there a way we can, give them lease lines? So the judiciary has been kind of reluctant to look at the order itself. They are actually looking at a midway settlement, and probably because they recognize that the executive has got a valid reason for internet shutdown, and they're trying to find a via media. The judiciary has not been questioning the order per se. I mean, these are the judgments in Manipur. Exactly. Well, yes. In fact, they've actually asked that restore the lease lines for the corporations and governments and institutes. But somewhere we are losing the picture.
But my question is this. So when we are talking about national interest, since a lot of the discussion really revolved around that, who is the nation? Is it just the government? Because are we not the nation as well? Because it's not, it's not just the curbing of the freedom of speech, the fact that, I can't tweet a rumor or I can't send across an inflammatory message on WhatsApp. It's also the fact that in this day and age, I literally cannot do anything that I'm required to do on a daily basis to live something approximating a normal life. And when we shut down the internet in the name of national interest or public order, justified as it may be, this is also getting affected. And again, as I think Mr. Dwarkadas and Mr. Jakhtiani also, and you pulled it up, how long do these shutdowns go on for? Because at some point, if in spite of the shutdowns, you can't bring it under control, then, perhaps it's not the internet that's the problem. If we are saying that, there were X number of terrorist attacks in Kashmir, and we have shut down the internet over there, and there have been, no phone or cell phone services, that's still going on, then perhaps that's not really a deterrent to those terrorists. And so, like Mr. Jain said, they are often using less than legal methods, they're often using less than direct methods. You are on Tor, you are transferring funds to crypto. In that case, the regular restrictions who are applied to a regular citizen are not really applicable to those guys. They can just, you're anyway breaking the law. You can just get a satellite phone and do it. So, who is it really benefiting?
And so, as you threatened, this was more a comment, less a question. I'm very sorry. I request everybody to keep the questions short. Would the panelists like to answer?
I think I agree with you. I don't think there is a question in that. Your comments are welcome and they echo what we think. If I have summarized what you had to say.
So, Mr. Jagtiani already raised the point, which is my question to Mr. Jain, that he talked about the litmus test. So, my question actually is that what are the parameters to distinguish between whether it's an actual national security issue or it is just a political circumvention of 19 clause 2? Secondly, Professor Deswani raised a point, that is, what is the extent to which the judiciary has played their role to Mr. Dwarkadas? So that question still remains unanswered. So I would like Mr. Dwarkadas to take that question as well.
So your question is well taken. It's not as if the judiciary has opened the door. Let us be very clear. What the judiciary has done is to say that there will be judicial review of a decision which may be taken by the review committee based on objective material. If nobody has carried it to the courts, that's one thing. But as and when it is carried to the courts will have to decide to what extent the order based on the material that was available with the first decision-making body, as well as there is a committee, as well as the review committee, whether it was sufficient material in the first place, whether it would come within the scope of national interest or not, and even if it did, whether the action of shutting down was proportionate either in geographical terms or time limitation terms. So that will definitely come in for consideration now that the doors have been thrown open by the court.
I just wanted to add one thing that, all of us, everybody expects judiciary to do miracles, okay, which judiciary has its own limits and its own constraints. So they may not be able to do a merit based, because they say whether national security is involved or not is not something which we will look into. But the restraint you have put on people is what we will look into. This is another problem which is faced even. And remember one thing. All of us look. Indian judiciary is the most powerful judiciary in that sense. But at the same time, they work within certain constraints. There's self-limiting constraints as well as other constraints. So we have to not have expectations from the judiciary which are miraculous. That's all.
I don't want to break up this party, so we're going to go on till about 8:15. So we've got 10 minutes more to take questions, but Mr. Jain has to leave. I know when we're sitting in the green room, we all said that how we all like dissenting judgments. So Mr. Jain, before you leave, I want you to have a last word.
Well, I think I will quote Jonathan Swift when it comes to the internet and rumors and all, that falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hitesh. Thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it, despite your busy schedule. Yes. So, do we have permission to go on for 10 minutes more? Yeah, we've got an 8:15 hard stop. We got about 10 minutes. We can take about 3 or 4 questions. You can go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Abhirav from Fiverr. So Kashmir was mentioned several times here, and I would like to quote something from Lieutenant General KJS Dillon, who was the 15th Corps commander in Kashmir, of the 15th Corps. So he mentions several ways in which these elements communicate with themselves, that is telegram groups, etc. And he also mentions of an ecosystem which prevails in Kashmir, which is disrupting the situation there. Now, should internet shutdown be applied when it comes to these types of situations where some groups may agree with the situation? And secondly, there has been amnesia on whether who gets to decide the proportionality of what is a national security issue and what is not. So who should be a deciding party in these cases? And
Can we take a couple of more questions that the panelists can collectively answer? I believe your question was about who decides about the national security issue, right? That was the crux of the question. Right. Could we have a couple of more questions?
Sir, my question is specific to Sharan, sir. It might sound like a rookie question, but regarding that concentric circle part, you said that law and order is the public order forms the biggest circle. So in Kashmir itself, like before 370 and everything, stone pelting was common, sleeper cells were very active. So don't you think in such a scenario, the biggest concentric circle was a permanent thing in Kashmir probably? That's why the number of days of internet shutdown or more, because it was a permanent question. So what do you have to say about that?
I'm Vaibhav Deshpande. My question is, the topic is of national interest, right? So going one step further, in 2022, Elon Musk was providing the Starlink internet for the Ukrainian forces in the Russia-Ukraine wars. So in one case, Ukraine wanted to launch a surprise attack on Crimea. So in that case, Elon Musk refused to provide the internet access to the Ukrainian military. So he cited the reason as if he had provided access to the Ukrainian military to launch a surprise attack on a controlled Russian territory, that's Crimea. In response, they may launch a nuclear war and it may engulf all the world. So, like, where do you see this problem in the national interest? Like, similarly, can you see that as in a world interest? And can similar thing happen in India also in the future? Like, someone refused to provide internet access, not government but private entity. Thank you.
Your question is directed to any particular panelist?
Yeah, Mr. Mihir Desai.
Right. So, could we?
I'll just say one thing, just to repeat what I said earlier. That the issue always is going to be whether a particular shutdown. Okay? Because see, problems can arise anywhere. It can. I mean, yesterday you saw that there was a shooting in USA where 18 people or 20 people were killed. Okay? And there is a debate going on in the USA, in various parts of the USA, whether arms should be bearing of arms should be restricted, not restricted. It's a major debate going on since 200 years, since the time the Constitution came in USA. So, yes, there are problems. Okay? The question is, the response to these problems is proportionate or not. That's what Anuradha Bhasin says. That's what some of the other judgments say. There are problems, but in order to kill an ant, you don't use a hammer. And that's the issue before us. One of the issues. I mean, there are many other issues, but it's one of the issues before us. Then, are you using a hammer in order to kill an ant? Is the problem such that requires an internet shutdown? I mean, this issue is not just here. I mean, it may have been more frequent here, but it's there in, I mean, the European Court of Human Rights has dealt with it. A number of African courts have dealt with it. That are you going to, I mean, the main thing is that even if you have a shutdown, that shutdown has to be very narrowly defined. It has to be in a narrow space. It has to be a narrow geographical area. It has to basically, your means have to achieve the goals, and that's why you have a shutdown. If your means can't achieve the goal, then as it was mentioned, if after 560 days, if you can't control of shutdown, then there is something really wrong with the way you are conducting the affairs, and not with the internet. So these are issues. So merely because state security is thrown at us, we don't necessarily respond by saying that yes, what you are saying is right and the shutdown was justified. I mean, these are the kind of issues which we need. It's not something which we can deal with immediately right now here in this panel. But these are issues. If you think about it a little more, you'll realize that these are questions of accountability, transparency, etc. coming.
If I can just respond to the question that was asked by one of the members of the audience to me specifically. First, you don't have to introduce any question as a rookie question. There are no rookie questions. They're all extremely important questions. But to come specifically to your question, your question, as I recall, was why does the state of affairs in Kashmir not qualify as a law and order problem for the last 550 days, suggesting that if it does, then does that not justify the internet shutdown? Just to clarify, law and order by itself is not one of the circumstances contemplated by 19.2 as a reasonable restriction. It's only public order and sovereignty of India. So if it was only a law and order problem, but not at the level of a public order problem, and the distinction between the two, as the courts have explained, is that a law and order problem could be a fight between two individuals, between two neighbors. It's a breach of peace. That's a law and order problem. A public order problem, when the same fight becomes a fight not between two individuals who are neighbors, but let's say between two communities or two neighborhoods as opposed to two neighbors. So you're really ramping up the scale of conflict, then it becomes a public order problem. And again, just because it is a public order problem, as everyone else has mentioned, that's not a justification for an internet shutdown. Because the enforcement of a restriction can't be mechanically applied whenever you have a public order problem. And I just want to add one more thought to this whole conversation today, is that one of the concerns that I have in being too liberal in our understanding of what is public order is that you start by taking away the internet. Tomorrow you suspend one more service, then you suspend one more service. What you're effectively doing through a series of executive decisions is imposing an internal emergency in the state, which really requires a legislative act. So the slippery slope that you're going down is then circumventing the fact that if you actually had such a serious problem in the state, it warrants presidential intervention, but you're not doing it through presidential intervention or proclamation, but a series of executive orders which in its sum total really amount to an internal emergency. That's the danger in being too liberal.
Somebody had mentioned about there being groups in Kashmir which are like underground groups of people who spread some kind of terrorism or warfare against the state. We cannot dispute this. It is a fact that there is dissent. But the cause for dissent may not be an act which endangers the national security. It may be a form of dissent, we don't know. Secondly, there must be objective material available with the committee which is going to recommend a shutdown, because there has to be a correlation between the internet being used as a means of communication to bring about or endanger national security. Just because there is dissent or there is an attempt to form opinions which may not agree with the government's view doesn't mean it's a threat to national security. And thirdly and most importantly, one of the guidelines which has now been laid down is that these orders can't operate forever. They have to be brought up every 15 days. The idea of 15 days is to indicate that if you cannot resolve whatever problem there is of national security within the shortest possible time, the reason being because as against the perceived problem of national security, you have to balance the damage which is being caused by shutting down the internet to the society at large. And that is why the maximum period is 15. If you can't do it in 15, we'll give you 15 more days. But if you just can't do it for 560 days, I don't think you have the right to govern. Thank you.
Mr. Blackouts, you made my job redundant. I think you summarized this so beautifully. I think the last word was yours in terms of where we are looking forward with this. I thank the panelists profusely. I know Justice Chagla for promoting this, Ma'am Sheikh for being here with us, and all the students. Could I ask all of you to have a big round of applause for the panelists? Thank you ever so much, and the panel is closed.
With that, we come to the end of the panel discussion for this evening. We must once again applaud all our panelists as well as our moderator, Professor Daswani, for this thought-provoking. I would now like to request Ms. Drishti Padrawala, the Assistant General Secretary of the Moot Court Association, to deliver our vote of thanks for this evening.
Thank you so much, panelists, for this enlightening discussion. Mr. Dwarkadas, Mr. Desai, Mr. Jain, Mr. Jagtiani, Professor Daswani, Honorable Shri Justice Chagla and Mrs. Chagla, Assistant Professor Ms. Sheikh, participants and ladies and gentlemen. It truly has been a privilege for the Moot Court Association of Government Law College, Mumbai to organize and host this panel discussion on the occasion of the 30th edition of the MC Chagla Memorial National Moot Court Competition in association with the Chief Justice MC Chagla Memorial Trust. I'd like to first thank the panelists for providing us with their scintillating inputs in today's discourse. The discussion today has managed to encapsulate the very intricacies of this issue, and I don't think that would have been possible in the absence of these esteemed panelists. I'm sincerely grateful to our moderator, Professor Kishu Daswani, who has led this discussion with his expertise and wit, and has provided the Moot Court Association with invaluable mentorship and guidance. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to Honorable Shri Justice Riyaz Chagla from the Chief Justice MC Chagla Memorial Trust for his unyielding support and cooperation in the organization of this event. I would like to thank the professor in charge for the Moot Court Association, Ms. Nuzhat Sheikh, and our Madam Principal for their unwavering support and dedication to the Moot Court Association. Ma'am, your guidance has been instrumental in making this event a success. Additionally, I would like to thank all the members of the Moot Court Association for their constant devotion and support towards the success of this event. This event would not have been possible without the assistance of the entire college administration, including the watchmen and cleaners of the college. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the teams that have arrived here from all across the nation. I truly hope that all the participants have found this to be an enriching experience, and I wish everyone the best of luck for the rounds. I would now request everybody to kindly stand up for the national anthem.
पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा लव शुभ नामे जागे लव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Participants and audience members are requested to remain seated while we escort the dignitaries. Thank you so much for being here.